Okay, Beyonders, welcome back to Tabletop and Beyond. I am your host, Justin. I am here with Dan. Welcome, Dan.
Good morning.
And we are joined by legendary guest, Mr. Paul Fricker. Paul, welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Paul, you have officially joined Chaosium in the last couple of weeks, and we are excited to hear about that. Like we told you before the show, we've had Mike Mason on here, we've had Michael O'Brien on here, and you are just continuing the legacy of excellent guests from Chaosium that we have that we love to see. So, welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you. I mean, that's a lot to live up to, but I'll do my best.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned to you when I was reaching out that I ran into you at Gen Con, and you were working the Chaosium booth there, and I have zero expectations that you remember our encounter because, there's like thousands of people there, but it was great to see you there, and I had a thought in my mind when you were there working the booth. I said, here's Paul working this Chaosium booth. He's not officially part of Chaosium, but I wonder if there's something going on here, and sure enough, right, a couple months later, here you are with Chaosium. So we're excited to talk to you about your journey on, how you got to this point, some of the work that you have done with Cthulhu and other things. And more importantly, I think that's very interesting to some folks who are getting ready to run some Halloween RPGs is like, what are some tips and tricks that you do to ratchet up the fear and horror in your RPGs? So we're excited about that. But before we get started and all of that, let's start with our Geek Week. Dan, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, I've had a particularly geeky week. That usually happens to me after I've completed one of these trips around the sun and gotten a year older. So it also means I waste money on myself particularly. So I realized I was only about 5 or 6 supplements away from having every single product that has ever been put out for the Empire for Star Wars Legion. So as a completist, I had no list building reason to go buy a whole bunch of supplements. In fact, I bought some of those I knew that are not very good in the meta. But as a pure nerd, total completist, I've got everything now. It's all glued up. I'm just about ready to finish painting probably today. I'll probably prime today and probably start painting tomorrow. So then I will. I've told myself I can build any list in the meta now for Star Wars Legion. Not that I even compete very often, but that's the excuse I've given myself. My other quick Geek Week thing is my good friend Justin Smith here helped us run a game of Pirate Borg. For those who are not familiar, Pirate Borg is kind of a gritty pirate RPG from our friends at Free League and at Limitron, and we did that just a couple nights ago, and it was really a great time. Justin did an amazing job. And we brought in a lot of people with different RPG experience, but everybody knows and loves Pirate. So we realize that it's a pretty brutal system, especially when it comes to character creation, because the buddy of mine sitting next to me during character creation only had 1 hit point. And so we were afraid he'd get hit with, like a stiff wind would take him out at any good point. So anyway, between Legion and Pirate Borg, it was a pretty geeky week for me.
And yet he survived.
He did. No, he didn't. He died.
Oh no, he died.
He died. Well,
he actually died in a very epic way.
He made it to the final boss, and we sent him to go fight the final boss first.
Yeah, yeah. They walked into a temple, and on the altar was this diamond that they were sent to go get. The only catch was that the diamond was in the hilt of a ceremonial dagger stabbed into a skeleton that was on this altar. So he had to, dislodge this dagger from the skeleton. And when he did so, the skeleton awoke and ended up wrestling over this dagger. And in one of the most epic moments of the game, he ended up struggling. And they had kind of this, strength test that they did against each other. and they tied. And so they're just continually wrestling over this dagger. And he's like, I'm gonna use my Devil's Luck coin, which is like a fate point or something like that, to re-roll.
Oh, and I convinced him to do this.
Yeah, to re-roll this. And because he rolled pretty low, or like pretty high on his strength and pretty low on the other guy's strength. And so he did it, and he ended up rolling like a 1.
A 1.
And
which
it
guaranteed his murder.
It guaranteed his murder, right?
Yeah.
Like so
I convinced him to do it. I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, burn that point. You could get the whole diamond. To be honest, that
great.
player wanted that. His character wanted the knife. We didn't send him to it. We didn't send him to his death. He volunteered, and we smiled like the Cheshire Cat and sent him up to go fight the monster. So,
it was great. Yeah, he ended up dying, and his death. He also unwisely chose to stand in the sacrificial bowl.
So he's reanimated, and then he fought us. So
yeah,
he
so
actually
his skeleton.
He had more hit points as a reincarnated skeleton than he did in life. So anyway, that's neither here nor there. Justin, why don't you take us away from us spinning yards about pirate RPGs of days of yore?
It was great. The tales of Bill the Pirate. But so that was good. Paul, how was your geek week?
I played. What did I play yesterday? I played Iron Sworn. With some friends. It's essentially I think it was originally designed as a solo game, so a fantasy game, but there is a version of it that can be played with a group. So we were playing that yesterday, and I think it's a a grandchild of the kind of apocalypse world style games. But yeah, that was a lot of fun. There's quite a lot of rolling dice, and it's quite free flowing and kind of improvised, I think, by the GM to a large degree. But we had a lot of fun with that. It was good. That was good. There was kind of an entering Moria scene. I mean, it wasn't really Moria, and it wasn't a Kraken. It was like vines crawling around, and there was this gateway, and we were all these vines were like trying to grab us, and we were trying to back into this gateway to what I figure is probably a dungeon. I hope it is anyway. And we're backing into that and backing into the stairs. And I said to the GM, this is a lot like Gandalf and the crew entering Moria. And he's like, oh yeah, I didn't think of that, but it is. Yeah. So I'm just hoping all the vines are going to pull down the doorway and it's going to trap us in there or something. But
yeah. Awesome. What was the name of that game again, Paul?
Iron Sworn.
Iron Swan. Okay, cool.
Sworn.
Sorry.
Like to swear an oath.
I mispronounced it. Iron Sworn. Got it.
Yep.
Let me just pull it up real quick, because to be honest with you, Paul, I have not heard of this.
Oh, okay. Yep.
But I see that it won a 2020 ENnie for best free game.
Yep.
So this was the free digital edition, includes the 270-page rulebook, character sheet, printable asset cards, and reference handouts. So that's pretty cool.
I mean, I'm probably going to get the sack now because I'm promoting, a non-Chaosium game. But what can I do? That's what I played.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
No, I think it looks really cool. So I'm gonna have to check this out, because I had, like I said, never seen that before. So let me ask you, Paul, how often do you get together and play with your crew, would you say?
Well, I have a regular Sunday afternoon group. When I say regular, it's a role-playing group, so it doesn't meet every week. But we try to meet every week. Beyond that, at the moment, it's mostly conventions.
Okay.
And I'm doing what have I got? I've got a couple of conventions. I had a couple of conventions last month. I've got one or two this month. So yeah, they're not too infrequent. And I like to, when I go to a convention, I like to run a game and play a game if I can. Mm-hmm. So if it's like a 1-day event, just get a couple of games in.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. We have our we have started what has kind of been an annual little mini convention. We did skip last year because all of us went to Gen Con, but all of us went to Gen Con this year, and we decided to pick it up again. We have an annual little convention that we call Guild Con. There's probably 20 to 30 people that come to it, which is not like anything to sneeze at, right? Like in
No,
terms of
cool.
a small little convention. The best part is it's at our buddy's basement.
Oh,
He
awesome.
has a very large basement. We can put 5 or 6 tables down there.
Wow.
And we have done it out of his basement for the last few years. But it started out with just, a bunch of us, like 5 or 6 of us that just wanted to get together for a long weekend and just play until we were completely exhausted. And we've just kind of added people to it and continued that tradition of being able to do that. So we have our little mini convention called GuildCon coming up in about 3 weeks. Like it's going to be the first real weekend, or second real weekend in November. So
nice. I think it's nice having like a community that gets together rather than.
Yep.
I mean, I love Gen Con and big conventions like that where you just meet in loads of people you never met before. But having like in a buddy's basement with a couple of dozen people, that sounds great because you're going to know everybody, and maybe there's a few new faces each time, but there's a sense of tight community, which is nice.
We realized that, like we love going to Gen Con, and when I go to a convention like Gen Con, I like trying all the things that I can't play at my house, and so I'll find the very weird random RPGs that aren't really out there, and things that are being kind of demoed and things like that. But at GuildCon, we like to play all of the games that we really like to play. And as we were putting out a schedule of like, who's going to run what and when, we realized that we really need a week. A full week to be able to play all the fun things that we want to play and run and all that stuff. And so if only we had enough time to dedicate to just playing games, so maybe when we all hit the lottery one day.
I don't know how local you guys are, but maybe you have to do one in one in October and one in the spring or something.
We're all very local. Usually it comes down to how many brownie points we all have with our wives.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, my wife's a role player as well, so get your wives playing if that's the case.
We tried that one time, and we realized that they're not role players.
It's not for everyone.
It's not for everyone. No. Yeah. Well, I call that the second most awkward night of our marriage.
I won't ask anymore.
I'm just kidding.
Awesome. So for my Geek Week, I was obviously ran that pirate board game, but I wanted to talk about the Apple TV series For All Mankind. Oh. It is an alternative space race story, as if the Russians had made it to space and to the moon first. And so that drove the United States to push their Apollo moon landing programs harder and actually get like bases up on the moon to kind of claim it. So it's almost like in our history now, the United States made it to the moon, and because nobody really followed up, like the Russians didn't really, make it there. Where everybody's like, okay, well, that was cool, and let's just move on to other priorities that we have as a nation rather than dumping all this money into a space program. With this alternative history, it's like, oh no, the space race is still alive and strong, and so, like in the second season, there's like a big base that's like on the moon that they have, and so it's been very interesting. It's, I think, more heavily aligned towards the drama of the astronauts and being on the moon up there for like 6 months at a time and things like that, rather than the sci-fi aspect of it. But it's really fun to watch this and imagine like, what if these things had happened, right? Instead of like thinking about the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in the 80s, which kind of didn't happen because they were focused on going to the moon. Like, what would have happened if like those things had worked out and we were fighting over the moon instead of doing proxy wars and on Earth and stuff like that. So there's some interesting things about it.
Have you heard the podcast called 13 Minutes to the Moon?
No,
So it's quite a lot of episodes, and it goes into great detail about the factual build up to that, to the moon landing. Basically, I think the 13 minutes bit is the bit where they go down in the landing module, and I think maybe it takes 13 minutes to reach the surface of the moon. But it goes through the whole build up to the program and all the interviews a lot of people that were involved in it, and it's really fascinating. So I think obviously you've got an interest in that, and this is that's like the true story told in great detail.
I am going to put that down on my list of things to listen to.
It's well worth a listen.
Yeah, I really, really love those podcasts that are kind of hyper focused on a subject, and like it's 13 episodes and that's it, right? That's their, maybe that's the season that they have that they're doing, and it's just very like deep dive into it. Those were really, really interesting to me. So yeah, thank you for that. But that was kind of my geek week, watching that as other than preparing for RPGs and things like that. So
I've been telling you to watch that show for years. I started watching that right when it came out.
Yeah, it is true. You have been telling me that. The problem is I don't have Apple products, so I don't have like a natural way to Apple TV. And so I was finally got around to picking it up and checking it out. So
cool.
But yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, Ronald D. Moore, who did Battlestar Galactica and who was a big part of Deep Space Nine, is the showrunner for All Mankind. So it's really well done.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would argue that a lot of the Apple TV products right now are probably some of the best streaming content out there. Like Severance is like one of my absolute favorites. It's so good, and Paul, you seem to enjoy.
Yeah, looking forward to the season 2 of that.
Yeah. So there's a lot of really good ones on there, and so I'm keeping my eyes open as some new series are dropping on the Apple TV stuff. So for sure. But it sounds like we all had a pretty good geek week there, and very, very nice and exciting. So, Paul, let's talk about you for a little bit. So, you have obviously been playing RPGs probably for a very long time, and you've written several modules yourself, several adventures, and published them, and many of them are published on the Miskatonic University
repository
repository, which is basically a community content section of Chaosium, right? That you can go and access community created products.
I mean, it's been a great facility for everybody that who wants to write a scenario. So anybody who has an interest in Call of Cthulhu and wishes to write a scenario can do so. It's a bit more involved than just writing it, because you want to write it, you want to get ideally you want to get somebody to play test it and edit it and so on, and get a bit of artwork for it. You might choose free art that you can find, and then put it together. But once you've done that, you can then upload it, and there's no licensing involved. The repository, like all community content programs, just takes care of that. So you don't have any concerns about licensing. And it goes on the repository, and any sales, you get 50%. So
wow, 50%. I didn't realize
you get 50% of the cover price goes direct to your account. And the rest is kind of split. I think Chaosium gets a percentage and Drive Through RPG gets a percentage, and that's the way it works.
Yeah. So go ahead.
And I'll just say, if anybody is interested in doing that, if you're on Facebook, then there is a very supportive Facebook community. I think it's just called Miskatonic University Repository Creators. If you put those words into Facebook, I'm pretty sure you'll find the group. And there's lots of people who are it's a very nice community that's built up around that.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you who are interested, Miskatonic Repository is basically a subsection of Drive Through RPG, where you find all of the titles. So you can get them in PDF and on print and demand. So if you're familiar with Drive Through RPG, this is where you can see them. What I really liked about the Miskatonic University titles is that you can find the ones that have gone gold and platinum, right? The ones that have been hot sellers, and those are not to take anything away from a lot of the new ones or anything like that, but some of those gold and platinum ones are really great adventures, and they show from the the sales that they have generated with those. And there's if you are if you have already worked through your Horror on the Orient Express that you've done, the official product from Chaosium, and you're looking for more, like, I would absolutely recommend people to go check out the Miskatonic repository for some excellent titles to play in their games. So yeah, something definitely to check out. So how many titles have you put up on the repository yourself?
I have three. I have three titles on there. The first one was Full Fathom 5, which is set aboard a whaling ship in 1847, if memory serves me correct. The second one was Dockside Dogs, which is my kind of take on Reservoir Dogs, the Tarantino film. And the third one is My Little Sister Wants You to Suffer, which is a kind of sci-fi futuristic Call of Cthulhu scenario.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah.
My little sister wants you to suffer.
Yeah.
This is going places. This is
good.
This is going to be great. It's fantastic.
So one of the things I wanted to talk about specifically, and there's a reason why that I decided to pull up Full Fathom 5. Well, there's a couple reasons. Number one, our astute listeners and viewers of this will recognize this artwork, as we had John Sumrow on the show about a few minutes, maybe it was almost a year ago, that we had John Sumrow on the show to talk about, what it's like being an artist in the RPG community, and what work is like, what the process is like, etc. And this is one of the images that he pulled up, saying that he did this for you and the product here. One of the interesting stories that he told was that this this sort of wizard-looking guy that's happening here on the cover was his neighbor that he had come stand in his garage for a little while so that he could, get the pose right. And I guess his neighbor even had the beard and everything.
Oh, and awesome! I didn't know that.
Yeah, he had him stand there for a little while to get it. The guy's like, "Are you almost done?" He's like, "Hold on."
But I can tell you something else. I don't know if John told you this, but first off, John, I love working with John, and I love his artwork. The captain in the tall hat on the bottom right there, he sent me some sketches, and I kind of had I worked with John, giving him direction on what I wanted for the cover. And the sketch that he'd done of the captain, we had a little bit of back and forth about, I kind of want him like this. And eventually I was just like, I'm just going to take a photo. So I sort of had myself doing. So that's basically a photograph that he's interpreted from my photo. So I'm the captain there. Which was kind of fun. But John, I've seen some of his other following his social media. Sometimes he posts his I don't know what you'd call them, like working photographs that with models and so on, that he works from into the artwork, which is quite marvelous to see. And and I was really pleased with this cover. It's fantastic.
His he has so much character in a lot of the stuff that he has drawn, and I was going to point out the captain's face here, where there's a lot of emotion going on in just that little image, right? Which is like horror, anticipation a little bit, and
disbelief.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff that's happening there. So
yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it's very, very good. Now, I want to talk to you. So I actually purchased this product not too long ago because I plan to run this scenario at our GuildCon coming up in a couple of weeks. And one of the things that intrigued me about it is that it wasn't set in 1920s Arkham, Massachusetts, right?
Yeah.
You don't see a lot of Cthulhu products set in the 50s
Yeah.
or 40s, let alone on a whaling ship. So can you tell us a little bit of like why you decided to come up with a scenario and the time period and things like that?
Yeah, I think I don't start off with a vision of a kind of stereotypical setting like the 1920s Massachusetts. A lot of Call of Cthulhu scenarios fit into that because if you want continuity, then that gives you that.
Mhm.
But my approach to the game, particularly because I very much worked with Mike on a lot of convention games, and convention games to me are very much like a horror movie or a horror story, in that the setup can be anything, and at the end of the movie, the movie's finished. And for the movie director, the next film they're going to make doesn't have to follow on from the previous one. It could be a totally different story. And if it's a horror film, chances are it's modern day, but often is. But just because the film director made one film, it doesn't build. It builds an expectation of quality, but it doesn't build an expectation of the plot. I don't think. So I just get ideas, and for this one, I was a big fan of Moby Dick by Herman Melville, and I've always wanted to be influenced by that in some way in terms of creating a scenario. And I just kind of wrestled with that until I had a scenario, really. And if the other ones I mentioned, Dockside Dogs, obviously that's influenced by the Tarantino film Reservoir Dogs. And I'm not going to say what My Little Sister was based on, but because it's a bit of a spoiler, but that was equally based on I guess inspired to some degree by a movie. And yeah, so often I just get my inspiration from I think whatever sort of sparks your imagination, really. Just run with it and don't be constrained. I was talking to Mike about this, about the game Call of Cthulhu, right? It's Call of Cthulhu is an H.P. Lovecraft story, but the game is so much more than that. The game to us, I think, is just you can run any story, well, any kind of generally horror based, but not strictly horror. It could be kind of almost like a thriller type thing. I was watching Before I Go to Sleep last week with Nicole Kidman. I think I'm getting the name right, the actor right. And it's about a woman who she's been through a traumatic experience, and every morning she wakes up and she can't remember what happened the day before. She can't remember anything from her life previously. So she wakes up and there's a guy in her bed, and he tells her that he's her husband, and so he has to tell her that every morning. And I saw that, the promo for it, and I thought, yeah, that's just the kind of thing that interests me. And I kind of thought it was going to be a horror, but then I saw, oh no, the genres were like thriller and so on. But to me, it bordered on kind of horror film. Yeah, it didn't have like the horror tropes particularly, but kind of a psychological horror, I guess. So I think, in Call of Cthulhu, you can do all sorts of things. And sometimes with my scenarios and designs, I end up bolting a bit of Cthulhu mythos onto it to sort of say, yes, this is definitely Call of Cthulhu. But really, I'm just creating something that I think is an interesting story. And that's usually kind of horror based. Yeah.
I had heard the other day, and this may be rumor, and Dan may be able to confirm this or not. But the Disney Star Wars story Andor, that is basically kind of a lead up to the Rogue One movie, I had heard that it was written as a kind of spy thriller script, and originally agnostic of a kind of a genre, and that Disney had picked it up and basically worked it into being a Star Wars story. So it started out as a story first, and then you had, the elements of Star Wars put into it. Now, whether that's true or not, I cannot confirm that, because I just kind of heard that through the grapevine. But I think you find a lot of, writers writing good stories, and then they say, this will fit in this genre, and then they end up tweaking it or bolting on aspects of it that make it that. And it sounds like that's a little bit of what you did with this Full Fathom 5. And I was going to ask you if Moby Dick was pretty much the inspiration of this. And, I think, like, if I scroll down, one of the first quotes that you have in here in the opening scene right here is from Moby Dick, right? In the opening scene, it's a Moby Dick quote. And, you just don't see too many whaling stories out there, as an RPG. And I think that's what makes us very unique.
I mean, I think one of the beauties of the whaling ship is isolation, because usually in horror, isolation is a great aspect, because it stops people reaching out for help. It just means you're stuck there. You can be stuck with those people. There's 23 people on board. There's nobody else. You're on a ship. You can't get to land. You can't call the police. There's nothing else you can do. So you can't run away from this. Well, you can jump in the sea, but that's
not the best option. Escape. Not always the best option.
No.
Yeah. One of the things that I was getting from the Full Fathom 5 when I was reading it is it had kind of echoes of the I don't know if you saw the AMC television series called The Terror. It was about the ship that had gotten stuck in the Northwest Passage, basically, and iced in, and they were stuck there, right, for a long time, like months and months, because once that freezes up near the North Pole, like, it doesn't unfreeze for a very long time. And I think even that year it was particularly bad. The ice came much earlier than they had thought, and it stayed for longer than they thought. And so the true life story is this really happened, right? And when they found the ship, nobody was there. And there was rumors of people, talking with the indigenous people, some of the Inuit, and that were up there, and they had mentioned this boat and stuff like that. And so there was a big mystery of, like, what had happened to them. But if you watch the AMC show, isolation was such a key part of that story. And it really, like, you didn't have anywhere to go to. You didn't have anywhere to turn to. You were, for them, they were stuck out on this sea of ice. For the Full Fathom 5, you're literally out in the middle of the ocean, and it's not like you can go leave the situation or even just go for help or anything like that. You got to deal with what you got to deal with.
Yeah, as I recall, with that search for the Northwest Passage, which is what it's the Terror, isn't it? It's called.
Yep.
They actually intended to get stuck in the ice. That was part of the design. They knew that the passage would be a long journey, and I think they had provisions.
Yep.
If that was one of the things that amazed me about reading up on that journey. That the real journey is that we'll get stuck in the ice for a few months, and then it'll thaw, and then we'll carry on. It's like, what? You're going to be
right?
stuck in a a not very big vessel. I mean, they're ships, they're not little boats, but the ships, they're not massive, and you're going to be stuck in there in the ice with just what you've got on board. It's just, and I think when I read Moby Dick, one of the things that I'd always, I'd heard of whaling ships and so on, and I'd always kind of figured that you'd get on the whaling ship, you'd go out for a few days, catch some whales, and come home.
Mm-hmm.
They're out for years.
Yeah.
They leave Nantucket. They may not come back for 2 or 3 years. And they might touch base in a few ports, and they might have a few meets with other ships and so on. But essentially, they're really out at sea for very, just mind-bogglingly long time. And yeah, I would just kind of captured my imagination. So, with the Full Fathom 5 at the start, one of the things is you've been out at sea for 13 months.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're somewhere in the Pacific, and part of it is they kind of follow the whale. I don't know if they call them whale roads. That's kind of Beowulf kind of language, but the kind of paths that the whales kind of took, the migration paths, I suppose, and then have ships and charts, and obviously the South Pacific to Lovecraftian minded people suggest something else, perhaps, but
right now, when you wrote this story, like you said, you were inspired by Moby Dick. Are you, and I'm asking this probably kind of understanding the question. Are you a whaling boat expert on this? Did you know like all the ins and outs of whaling ships, or were you just like, I'm just gonna roll with this and kind of learn along the way, and
just
try
had
to
to
make
learn along the way. Yeah, I
yeah
really, I really don't know much. Well, I really know nothing about sailing. So normally this is something else. If I was just running this scenario for myself,
Mhm.
I would just make up some stuff. Probably I'll do a cursory look at, I don't know, a Wikipedia article or something, and then I'll just run with it, and I'll just base it on what I know from watching like Master and Commander, which is an awesome film, and they do meet
Yep.
a whaling ship during that film as well.
Mhm.
And having read Moby Dick, that would be enough for me to present it to my group. But when I'm publishing it, I feel a duty to provide more, factual information and more research. But researching these things, research is always quite hard for me anyway. I always find research quite hard because it's, to a degree, it's where do you stop?
Yeah.
And a lot of this stuff is like old documents. There are kind of historical societies and studies about whaling and the impact it had and the people who did it and so on. So there is quite a bit of information. But when I came to the ship plans, I remember being particularly challenging because there are ship plans, but they'll have words on them that meant nothing to me, and I had to figure out, well, what is, I can't remember off the top of my head, I can't remember what some of the terms were, but even even the regular nautical terms on, even if you just look at a modern ship today, they'll use nautical terms, right? And if you're not educated in that, then you have to look up to see what they actually mean. But when we're talking about ones from 170 years ago, of a very different type of ship, we're talking about sailing ships, and we're talking about the equipment for whaling. So a lot of that was quite obscure, and I don't think I had to make stuff up. I think I was able to research it, but maybe not to be able to find some of the depth of information that I would have liked to have done. On the other hand, I think there's a limit to how much information you want to give someone. This is
Right.
really designed as a one shot, and it's still, there's quite a bit of information in there because, you, Justin, you've got the book, booklet, whatever you want to call it, a slim volume, the scenario, and you're going to run it as a one shot for maybe 3 or 4 hours. How many hours do you want to put in preparation? That's the question for you. How many hours would you say was, if you, even if it's like, it's something you really want to run, and you've got some great players and you want to do a good job of it, how many hours do you feel is kind of a reasonable investment are you willing to put in to prepare? Is that a question you can answer?
No, I mean, I think because it's a, it's a one shot, the pre-gens are included in all of this, you know what I mean? So I don't need to like come up with characters. I don't need to come up with this. I don't need to write the scenario, right? This is me reading it and preparing it. I would say this would only take me probably like, I don't know, 2 to 3 hours to like really run through, like that includes reading it top to bottom and then playing out, it kind of in my mind and my notes, like, things I need to watch out for, things I need to be aware of. and how to move the cheese if needed, right? Like,
Yeah.
or to effectively run the game, right? So I would say like 2 or 3 hours, right? Probably
Yeah.
max.
So that's kind of an evening prep and an evening
Yeah.
playing, kind of.
Yeah.
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 I think that's
Yeah.
that's fair enough. I don't think I can't really expect people to spend more time than that in preparation. So
Yeah.
that's kind of what I mean by the level of information you can give.
Yeah.
I think because if I went into greater detail, you might be bored reading it, or you might enjoy reading it. But either way, are you going to be able to? How much of that are you going to be able to relate to your
Yeah.
players? You know, in the game. So I think there's a limit to how much. I think as a writer, I'm just trying to give you enough of an impression of the setting such that you can confidently present it to your players and give them the impression of a real world, a convincing world at least. Yeah.
And you, as the writer, you've filtered out a lot of that unnecessary stuff. You know, here's the information that's useful to drive the story forward. And if the players get off the rails a little bit, you've got some more to go off of. But
yeah,
the great thing about having the writers be also players, also be great GMs, is that you're able to edit the film, right? You're able to shoot more footage, yet not use that footage in the final product, but have that footage still and have that research inform that final product without it being so overt and it just have to be more data that the GM has to load in their mental RAM.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that sort of stands out to me is like, as an illustration, perhaps, is there's a thing on the ship called the Triworks. Who knows what that is? Well, what it is basically a stove that they melted down the blubber, the whale blubber, to render it into oil. And that's fine, but you've got a big metal stove that you're stoking with. Now, I'm not sure if it was coal or wood, but you're building a big fire under a cauldron, basically, on a wooden ship with a massive pot of oil, highly flammable. Well, that's the whole point of the oil, right? It's highly flammable on board, on the deck of a wooden ship. And, when you tell the players that, they're like, oh.
Wait a minute.
Modern health and safety. I don't think enters into it.
And it smells wonderful.
Yeah. Out in the middle of nowhere, too, right? Yeah. That's great.
So just a little thing like that, though, I think that's a little, everybody can kind of almost visualize that. And it makes you go, oh my God, that sounds dangerous. And it sounds convincing that, obviously that they would have to do that. And it doesn't take a lot, I think, to pull you into the setting. Then, if you can imagine that heat and the smell, and well, you immediately said about the smell, right? That pulls you sensorily into the setting. And I think it's hooks like that you can use. It doesn't have to be a great deal. Just that one thing pulls you in, I think.
Absolutely. Now, products like this, obviously, got the attention of Chaosium for you, and you've, like we mentioned earlier, recently joined them full time. So, what are you doing for them now? It's being a part of the official crew.
Yeah, so I'm on board as I'm termed an associate editor. So I work with Mike and the rest of the team. There's a team of editors that work on the Call of Cthulhu range, and we have a whole raft of different books and projects that I can't really talk about. but what I can say is there's a lot of things lined up to come out, and each one of those products, what did we have come out? We had I wasn't involved with Regency Cthulhu, but that's one that came out last year, I think. And there was Cults of Cthulhu, which I had a hand in editing the scenarios for that. That was back when I was freelance. So I've been working with Chaosium for like over 10 years, but as a freelancer. So this is just kind of formalizing my role, I guess. And day to day, I'm editing. We got some projects from upcoming books, and Mike will say he's the coordinator for the Call of Cthulhu line, and he will just say, Paul, do you want to work on this project? And I'll say, yep, that sounds great. And I will, depending on what the project is, it may be scenarios. It's usually often a collection of scenarios that I've worked on. So the last one I worked on was Mansions of Madness 2.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
And that is one I can talk about. It's not out yet, and I'm not sure when it will be out, but it's been, it's in process. So that's a collection of 5 scenarios. There was a volume 1, right, that came out a few years back. Mm-hmm. There was the original version that came out in around 1990, I think, 89, 90. Yeah. And the volume 2 is going to include one of those scenarios, updated and reworked. Oh, cool. Because it is like, what is it? That's 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So I think anything that's written 30 years ago, it stands some up, even though it's historic, it was set in the 1920s, it still stands some, tailoring to the new rules with new advice and just new, updating to modern kind of sensibilities and standards, really.
Yeah, I think a lot of, if you think about how role-playing was back in the 1980s versus how role-playing has evolved now, many argue that we're in the golden age of role-playing tabletop games right now, with just so many being out there and it being very much popularized through different mediums, so that, the average player has different expectations now than they did in the 1980s, and some of them have been around since then, so their expectations are one born out of experience, like they've experienced so many things, so now they have different expectations than they did when they were maybe 15 years old playing
Absolutely.
a scenario in the 1980s, so
and this is part of the job is trying to cater to all those different people. So, as authors, putting stuff out, we know that not everybody plays the game like I do and like you do, and everybody's got, broad brush. There are various different approaches, but you kind of got to put it in a way that it might be somebody who's just picked up the game a couple of weeks ago, and it might be somebody who's been playing it 40 years.
Yeah.
So you've kind of got to try and offer support to all of those different people as much as one can.
I think that raises an interesting question. When you guys are writing your scenarios, what are the who's the audience that you're writing for? Is it, do you have kind of a target demographic that you're trying to, that's sort of your main bread and butter audience, or are you just trying to write a great scenario that would appease a lot of people?
I think the latter. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, sometimes if we're writing, it's not so much like a demographic like age. It's more that sometimes you might be writing one designed for new keepers.
Okay.
But that could be a new keeper who's in their teens or in their whatevers,
100%.
in their 50s or whatever it could be. So it's more to do with experience. Having said that, most scenarios, I was asked about, the top 3 scenarios for starting keepers a while back, and it's like, well, there's not many that are actually designed for starting keepers. Some of them I'd say are more complex than others.
Yeah.
And I'd say my Full Fathom 5 is probably, I think I put in the blurb on Drive Through RPG, if this is the first Call of Cthulhu scenario you run, you might want to run something else. But if you read it and want to run it, knock yourself out, go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first scenario I ran was from the starter box, right? Which was a Dead Man Stomp. And then I ran the Edge of Madness, Edge of Darkness.
Edge of Darkness,
yeah, that was in there as well, and had great times with both of those. But that was enough to kind of get my Cthulhu feet under me to be able to run other scenarios. Which, I saw that blurb that you had put in your Full Fathom 5, and I said, "Oh, okay. Well, let me read this and see what's going on here." And I read it, and I'm like, "Okay, I feel like I can handle this," because one of the best parts about Call of Cthulhu is that there's just an unpredictability that happens with your players. When the crud hits the fan, is the polite way of saying it. When things go south, players will start to do things because they're just like, I don't know what to do. This is going to get wild, And so, Anyway, so it's kind of interesting because like I read your Full Fathom 5 and I said, okay, I've got this, no problem. But just knowing that I had already been through the gamut a couple of times I've read Dead Man's Stomp a couple of times and also Edge of Madness a couple of times, and so you just understand there's a bit of unpredictability with your players that are going to happen. With I think more so with Call of Cthulhu than if I were running a D&D campaign, just because when the psychological hits, there's some funny choices that people make, So
I think in D&D and games of that ilk, I like playing D&D as well, but you're more of a party and you've kind of got a mission, whatever that might be. I mean, I'm talking generally. Obviously,
for
people
sure.
will play it however they want to play it. And as your character class and background, they kind of give you, objectives. You're trying to, in D&D, you're trying to acquire more stuff and go up levels, and that's kind of an inbuilt set of goals for you to follow. D&D players might play it however they want to play it and play their characters in all sorts of different ways, obviously. But that's a starting base. Whereas with Call of Cthulhu, you're really just playing a bunch of characters, and they could be anything. It could be us three.
Yeah.
In just like we are, because you play real people. It could be us three, and I get a phone call now, and somehow we all get hooked up in some kind of mystery. So, but we've all got real lives and our own agendas, and so there's I don't know, there's less perhaps direction, less kind of in-programmed direction than there is in something like D&D. I feel like I'm not expressing that very clearly, but and again, going back to the horror films, people do all sorts of, the characters in horror films do all sorts of weird things.
Yeah.
It's
unexplainable things, right? That you're like, why are you running into that building?
Exactly.
And I think Mike Mason said it really well when we had him on the show one time. He says one of the best parts about Call of Cthulhu is that you're experiencing heroic moments with normal people.
Yeah.
Right. And that's really where like the heroism comes in. Like when you play a thing like D&D or even Star Wars or something like that, you are very clearly the heroes. You've been given heroic talents and traits and things like that to overcome any obstacle. Call of Cthulhu, you're just the normal guy. You don't even have that many hit points, and you're probably terrible with a firearm. You can barely drive. Like there's like all of these things that you're just like a normal average person, which I think adds to the elements of horror and terror. And it brings me to one of the main things I want to talk to you about is that you can play D&D, you can play Star Wars, you can play all of these different genre of games. And always when we hit about this time of the year, I hear a lot of people say like, okay, I am very interested in doing a horror one shot with my D&D group, or I'd really like to inject a spooky story into my gaming group that I have is just a little one shot. So if they're not playing, first off, I would say go play Call of Cthulhu if you want to do an awesome horror one shot. Go get the starter set for $25, which is an amazing price for what you get, because it's fantastic, and the horror is built in there. But if you really want to take your gaming campaign that you guys have been doing for a couple of years and just do a little side quest to have like a little Halloween style story, what are some pieces of advice, Paul, that you would give to a GM that's trying to figure out how to like take a normal D&D heroic campaign? They're off to go fight the lich that is terrorizing the city, and really turn that ratchet up the horror and make it a really spooky story.
So I think that horror is something that plays on our emotions. So you've got to try and latch into that in some way. And the way that, I mean, I think there's two things here. One is to try and create some atmosphere. And if you're playing in a brightly lit room in the middle of the day with the sunlight streaming in, you can still do it. But there's a reason why we're afraid of the dark, right?
Yeah.
So, well, maybe there isn't, but we are afraid of the dark generally. And if you can play in some evocative setting with candles and some creepy music or something in the background, that all can help. Just like Halloween party, if you had a Halloween party outside in the sunlight, that's one thing. But you have a Halloween party in a basement with low lighting and creepy music and everybody's in costume and there's cobwebs and everything, then you just get into the mood more. And it's about getting into the mood. I've said this before, it's like a totally different but a romantic meal, candlelight, glass of wine, and all those things that make it a romantic meal. There's a reason we do all those things, is to evoke those emotions. So that's one thing, is kind of the set dressing, if you like.
Yeah.
But you don't always have access to that, because you might be at a convention and you're not in control of the surroundings. But I think what you do always have control of is yourself. And you can't do it all the time. You can't make it constant horror. And if you think of your favorite horror movie, I'm going to say it's not horror all of the time. There are peaks and troughs. And when I'm trying to evoke that sort of horror thing, I just try and feel it in me a bit, and then try and communicate it. And I just think, what would be creepy and scary here to me, and I just try and exaggerate those things, or bring those things out, or point them out to the players. And then if there's something that kind of gives me a shiver down my spine, I just try and evoke that in the way that I play the NPCs, in the things they say, and just try and communicate that feeling. Because I think there is that sense of empathy, that if somebody is feeling something, we pick up on that. And that's, I don't know if that's helpful, but that's kind of what I do. So that can be things like lowering your voice and just simple things like that, and the tone of voice.
Yeah, it's a little bit harder to do this than just to watch a movie, right? Because the movie, totally, you're strapped in, you're along for the ride, and the director can choose when to show you things that you as the audience know, but the main characters don't, right?
Yeah.
And it's hard to do that with a role-playing game, especially an investigatory role-playing game that Cthulhu usually is, right? Like, you're trying to uncover things. You can't reveal all of the, backstory or all of the things that are happening in the background, because it would kind of be a spoiler a little bit of what's happening.
Yeah.
But what I think is key is kind of showing some of the unexpected, right? Like some of those things that give you those clues to something nefarious is going on, or something dark or sinister is happening that they're just not expecting there.
Yeah. And I think, absolutely, revealing those things, because role-playing games, that there's nothing actually happening, is there? It's all just in what we say and what we imagine. And I think that the key thing of role-playing games, the I don't know, the secret of role-playing games, is that they inspire our imagination and getting people on the same page. So if somebody has gone down in the cellar, well, they've got their torch, they've gone down in the cellar, and they might not be really thinking about what that means. So you can say to them, well, you're down in the cellar. You're on your own now, aren't you? Can you hear the others upstairs? And they're like, yeah, I can. No, you can't. You can't hear them upstairs anymore. It's really cold down here. And just try and evoke that feeling of isolation, whatever it is, but just really focus on the moment, like you would in a film. You'd suddenly, they'd just be there shining the light around, and you'd maybe see the flash of their face looking sort of pale and frightened, and just really try and bring them into the moment. However you can do that by just making them focus, and I think trying to maybe focus on one player for that, or a little group, and try and get everybody else to quieten down and not be making jokes and things. And I'm not saying tell everybody stop making jokes. It's like you just got to. But I think they respond to you as the GM. So if you suddenly become very serious, then other people may do as well.
I really love this idea that and to be honest with you, I had never really thought of this. Is really make that moment personal for the player there. You know what I mean? Like, and like you said, like, you're down here in the cellar now. What are you thinking? What, like, can you hear this? Can you feel this? Like, and really kind of make that sensory experience that you're talking about. And I think because what I tend to focus on, I think as a GM, is the situation of what's happening.
Right.
And not really make that situation a personal experience for that player in that moment, or that player's character. Like, so this is what you see, this is what you hear, and not really being able to let them internalize that.
And I think the one of the key things here is don't say those things you just said, Justin, but don't say this is what you feel.
Yeah.
Ask the player how they feel. And also maybe like, well, no, not maybe, have like the X card and things like that. So if people are like genuinely getting freaked out, you've got some sort of way out for them to indicate, actually, I'm not enjoying this.
Right.
Because hopefully that's not the case, but that's a good backup that you've got that there to fall back on. But yeah, I think sort of trying to personalize it and just try and like I said, this is like you've been playing, you've been having a laugh, and then maybe an hour in, and then something happens, and you kind of just zoom in on that moment, and people are going to remember those moments. And the contrast between being all jolly and having a laugh and everything, and those kind of horror moments, I think is the more you can accentuate that, the better. And those are the bits that people are gonna remember, I hope.
Yeah, I think a lot of the horror movies that you watch start out with a lot of people having a great time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's
totally.
like, hey, we're going on vacation. Like, everybody's having a good time. We're at this hotel, and we're checking in. We're having a laugh. We're doing all these fun things. And then you turn around and there's two girls standing in dresses just staring at them, like AKA The Shining, and you're just like, okay, that's really weird because it's out of the ordinary that you see, you know what I mean? And then it's okay, it's going back to, hey, happy, like we're, having a good time, and, injecting some of those things where it's just unnatural, right? Because you wouldn't see normally two girls standing side by side just staring at you holding a balloon, like that's very weird, unsettling.
And it's that contrast between the two. So you've got to establish the good bit at the start, I think. So this is why often we don't show the monster right at the start. Sometimes you can if you want that effect, but I think typically as soon as you bring in the supernatural, as soon as you bring in the horror, people switch to focusing on that, and that works better, I think, generally, if you've established a baseline of we're just real people and we've got something to do that's just normal, regular. Maybe we're just at a party chatting, and you start to establish some element of real life, and you start to establish these are characters we care about. Then you've got something to play with, and because people, if they're not bothered about their characters, if there's no investment in the characters, it's hard then to really make the horror hit home as much, I think.
Yeah, and as the GM, you've got to, if you're not going to sacrifice player characters for that investment, you've got to do that with the non-player characters to get them drawn into the danger of the situation or the horror of the situation. And that's really on. First of all, if you're going to introduce a non-player character for the first time, there's gonna have to be some depth there in order for when the bad thing happens to that non-player character, that amps up the horror a little bit, that juices that, and that's a little bit more work on the GM than probably, than just here's monster, fight monster, get gold, move forward.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you said if the players aren't invested in their characters, right, and you kind of establish that. I was gonna mention, like you said, Dan, the non-player characters using that as well, like having them get invested in, maybe I'm using this hotel example, but maybe the concierge is a really charismatic character, and then something bad happens, right? So they're sort of hooked into that NPC as well, that has impact because they're emotionally attached to them as well, right?
Yeah, and if it's an NPC, what I like to try and do is at the start, sort of talk to them about the NPC that's gonna, this key NPC that's important, and maybe just put it to the players rather than telling them, "Oh, this is your brother," or you really like this person. Say to the players, there's this guy. Why is your character friendly with this guy? Who are you related to this guy, or is he a friend, or does he owe you money, or whatever it might be? Just because I think always things that the players come up with are usually more emotionally. There's more connection if the players come up with them, and they remember them better, and B, it's usually there's a little bit of them that comes through into that relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, these are all excellent tips on how to inject some horror into it. And some of the best horror games I've played were non-horror RPGs, right? Just because you mentioned that contrast that you can have with it. And so Dan and we paint miniatures for miniature games that we have. And any artist worth their salt will tell you the key to having really good looking miniatures is contrast, right? You need to have your you need to have your lights, you need to have your lows, you need to have your your highlights, your shadows, and things like that, your different colors that contrast with each other to really make it stand out and pop. And when you were talking about the contrast of the good times and the horror times, I think that I was reminded of that, of where to really make those moments stand out and play off of each other, you need to have that contrast. And so whether that's within the scenario, you definitely need to have that within the scenario that you're running, but even just injecting a horror session within your larger campaign can really play to that fact of like, ooh, that was a horror session, because the rest of your session may be the gold and glory campaign that you're headed after, and not really dealing with something that is nefarious and different.
Yeah, I think I was hearing somebody recently saying comedy isn't a genre. You can have comedy anything. You can have any genre. You can take and add comedy to it if you so wish. You can have comedy. I mean, horror is a genre because of all the horror tropes. So you can have comedy horror. But in a way, you can take horror, or just the feeling, not the, I don't know, the vampires and the tentacles and everything, but just the sensations, and put that into whatever story you want, really. Particularly if it isn't horror based. So I'm just trying to think of an example off the top of my head, but sometimes when we might go and see a movie or a TV show, and we're not expecting it to be horror, and then suddenly it takes a twist, and we're like, oh, this is not what I expected. I particularly, so often now we watch something, we know it's like, oh, it's got supernatural, we already know it's got the supernatural in it. But I think it's always so great that when you're watching something, and it's not until the supernatural turns up like halfway through, and you don't know it's going to happen. Obviously, with Call of Cthulhu game, it's written on the title. Everybody just know, you kind of feel a bit shortchanged if there isn't any supernatural, right? But if you're doing it with a different game, and you introduce, it doesn't have to be supernatural, but something, that horror vibe, I think you can fit it into whatever you want. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And if you're a horror fan, I guess you're going to do that.
Exactly. Well, we're getting close to time here, and so I wanted to ask you, as sort of our parting advice, if someone is interested in running a Cthulhu game, let's say they're experienced keeper or not, what scenario would you recommend that they go and pick up? If they wanted to run up sort of a one-shot Cthulhu game, what's a good one for them to run?
Okay, so I mean, you mentioned the starter box set. The Call of Cthulhu starter box set is a brilliant introduction. It really you can start off not knowing anything about role playing games, let alone Call of Cthulhu, and open that up and play the solo and learn the rules, and then the one-on-one, and then the running small groups. So that's a really good introduction. I think off the top of my head, if you were to run a one shot, well, with potential to go further, I would say, I mean, there's two that spring to mind that are both kind of in the core rules. So there's some Crimson Letters by Alan Bly in the core rule book, which I think is a great scenario, and it's right there in the Keeper rule book. I don't really hear it being. I mean, I do hear of it being played, but I don't hear of it being played enough. I think, and it's got a great facility in there, and this isn't a great spoiler, I think, because when you play it, it's not going to matter. But for keepers, you get to choose who the bad guy is. So it's written in such a way that it could be quite a few different people. Obviously, as a player, that doesn't matter, because there is going to be, the keeper's going to have decided who the bad. I'm using baddie in inverted commas, but who the baddie is, and that is just such a, I think, quite an unusual setup, and it's just such an engaging scenario as well. So there's that, and that has the potential to lead into more than a one shot, if you wish. There's also Blackwater Creek by my friend Scott Dord. That's in the starter box set. No, forgive me. That's in the Keeper Screen set, and that's a scenario in which potentially you can play investigators from the Miskatonic University, or if the keeper in the group wishes to, you can also play a group of like bootlegger gangsters.
Oh, nice.
Getting in there in the in the 1920s and all that. So those two scenarios I would put forward as pretty solid, well, very solid scenarios, and I think you're always going to have fun with either of those.
And they're go ahead, Dan.
I think that's great. I think sometimes some of the best adventures are completely overlooked because they're sitting on the shelf in the core rulebook, especially for longtime gamers that have built up lots of core rulebooks on the shelf. I think there's this hesitancy as a player who owns the core rulebook to try to not to read that, and as the GM or the keeper, your default is, well, if other people in the group have the core rulebook, they probably read that adventure. I think that's genius design to say, the spoiler will still be the keeper's decision, and it could be somebody at the table. I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, Paul, thank you so much for coming on our show. We loved having you on here. I feel like we could have talked for at least another hour or two.
Yeah, I think so.
There's so many things to do. So we'd love to have you back at another time to just keep talking about what's happening there at Chaosium and what you're up to. So you are welcome back, sir, to anytime on the show. So
thank you.
We thank you for being here, and to our listeners, please go check out Chaosium, go check out the Miskatonic University, and also check out Full Fathom 5, because as I've been reading through it, I'm very excited to run this in about 3 weeks, and I'll give my report on it when in mid-November after we get done running it at our GuildCon. So but to everybody else, have a great night, and we will see you all at the tables.
Good night.